I almost feel like I need 3 screens. That would be a little extra.
I've seen it though. I've seen folks with
Yeah.
monitors.
It's hard to go back. All right. So at this time, it's 5 o'clock. So I'd like to begin our listening session, and I'd like to introduce Dr. Watts to begin. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you, President Daniels, members of the board, staff, our esteemed guests and partners in this work from OEO and Discipline Coalition. I want to thank everyone for your time and energy this evening as we continue to listen and to learn about how we can address, I would say better address the needs of our students, staff, and families. Given what we've heard thus far, I do want to welcome each and every member and know that our work today is part of our accountability efforts. And as we've talked about in the past, recent past, that accountability does not mean or have a negative connotation in Kent School District. Accountability is simply the answer to the question, when we have set a goal and we've achieved it, what happens? And it also answers the question, when we've set a goal and we do not achieve it, again, what happens? And the implication is that something should happen. Our response should be requisite to address the needs that exist within our community. You know, that we've all been working hard and smart together, and I want to thank Melissa Laramie for her leadership in this effort and bringing our team together as well, this ongoing communication effort. And I will again turn it over to Melissa for our welcome and agenda, or to our team for a welcome and agenda setting this evening, excuse me, welcome. Thank you, Melissa.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Watts. And we are actually going to start with Jordanos from the Office of Education Ombuds to get us going this evening.
Perfect, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Dr. Watts. Thank you, Melissa. I think it would be great to ground ourselves as we have the last few times that we've met together in the anti-racist principles. And for that, I actually would like to turn it over to South King County Discipline Coalition. And Charisse, if you are ready. And I also have it pulled up if that works better.
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay.
Sorry, I can't turn my camera on because I learned when I turn my camera off, then I lose connectivity. So I'm sorry.
We can hear you though. You sound good.
Yes,
we can hear you.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Okay, so how we'd like to ground ourselves is in the People's Institute an anti-racist principle when it's to deal with like organizing. So the first thing we want to talk about is analyzing power. You know, as society, we often believe that individuals or their communities are solely responsible for their conditions. Through the analysis of institutional power, we can identify and unpack the systems external to the community that create internal realities for many people's daily experiences. The other thing we want to uplift is developing leadership. Anti-racist leadership needs to be developed intentionally and systematically within local communities and organizations. We also want to uplift and think about gatekeeping. People who work in institutions also function as gatekeepers. And this is something that I also have to work on myself. So I don't want anyone to think that anyone's called out, but we're all calling each other in. Gatekeepers to ensure that the institution perpetuates itself. The gatekeeper becomes the agent of institutional transformation by operating with anti-racist values and networking with those who share those values and maintain accountability in the community. Another thing we want to uplift is identifying and analyzing manifestations of racism. Acts of racism are supported by institutions and are nurtured by societal practices that reinforce and perpetuate racism. We also want to uplift learning from history. History is a tool for effective organizing, understanding the lessons of history. Also, history allows us to create a more humane future. We want to also think about maintaining accountability. Organizing with integrity requires that we be accountable to the community struggling with racist oppression. Networking. We recognize that the growth of a movement of social transformation requires networking, building a net that works. Networking means building principled relationships based on humane values. Then there's also sharing culture. Culture is the life support system of a community. If the community's culture is respected and nurtured, the community's power will grow. We also want to talk about undoing internalized racial oppression. Internalized racial oppression manifests itself in two forms: internalized racial inferiority, and then also with internalized racial support, or the acceptance of and acting out of a I'm having a hard time with this one. Definition is rooted in the historical designing of one's race over many generations. This process of empowerment and access expresses itself as unearned privileges and access to institutional power and invisible advantages based on race. And then also the most important, undoing racism. Racism is the single most critical barrier to building effective coalitions for social change. Racism has been systematically erected, and it can be undone if people understand what it is and what it comes from and how it functions and why it's continued to be perpetuated.
Thank you, Charisse, for grounding us in the anti-racist principles. I just wanted to give a quick recap of today and kind of the path that we've been on up to this point. So this is our third time for all of us to connect. And in the first session, we had a chance to listen to families' experiences and also student experiences in the district, some of the barriers faced. And we asked district to just come and listen. And then in the second session, we had district reflect back on what was shared in the first session, and then also share a little bit about different resources within the district. What became apparent from feedback from community, and then also from Kent also, is that it really felt like a third was necessary. A lot of times, you know, when students and families share, there is, of course, that desire to hear about how the system is going to be accountable to students and families that historically it's not accountable to. But there really just kind of needed to be more in that reflecting stage, not so quick to kind of give answers that are definitely needed, but there just really needed to be a third come back together that's intentional about concrete steps that are being taken, steps to be considered, so that, again, the system is accountable to all students, and specifically students of color and families of color. That, again, historically, it has not been the case up to today. And so for today, there have been questions raised, not only about short-term goals for the district, but also a long-term game plan. And that is what we hope to cover today. And just to know that, as has been said in the past, this is an ongoing process. We will continue to support one another and to regroup and come back with one another to continue to build this work. And with that, I would like to pass it to Melissa and Dr. Watts as well. I'm going to pass it over to Kent to talk about some of the items on today's agenda and to begin with the share out of some of that information.
Thank you, Jordanos. I really want to just briefly take a moment to honor and lift up the partnership, because that has been a key focus of this work and our journey together with both the South King County Coalition, Discipline Coalition, and with OEO. When we began this work and began the discussion about having these listening sessions with our board back in December, we had a vision of 2 sessions and kind of what it would be, but throughout this process, we've remained adaptive to the needs of our community, and we've continued to talk about, as Jordanos just said, responsive to what was needed to really be reflective, to begin a relationship, not only with our families who expressed vulnerably the needs that they've been feeling, but also with the partners of the coalition and OEO, and what this means long term for us as a district, for us as staff and our board, but what this means moving forward. So not just complying to comply, not checking a box, but really beginning a relationship and changing practices. We don't have to do things the way that we've always done them. And so I want to thank specifically Jordanos, Charisse, and Mahogany for the hours and hours of deep conversation, of thoughtful planning, and really just reflection on what it is that this could be, what it doesn't have to be, and what is possible for our future together to meet the needs of our students and our families, and just the really open and honest conversations that we've had. So thank you for your time. We've also been really thoughtful in moving at an understandable pace to meet the needs of our students and our families, and be respectful of our staff and where we're at right now with the reopening process. We had a very open, frank conversation about, is this the right time? We did not want this to be a transactional evening where we just answered questions that had been raised, but we wanted this to be meaningful as families have been making the choice about bringing their students back into the building after spring break, because that's not the focus of this conversation, but it's weighing heavy on the hearts of our parents and our families, and we understand that, we acknowledge that. So tonight we wanted to offer, really begin changing how we come together with our community and changing the power dynamics of community conversation. So this is an agenda where community gets to have a say in what the agenda looks like. So we're prepared to walk through any one of these 4 agenda items, but we don't want to prescribe how this evening's going to go. So We want to offer our community the opportunity to choose which area we focus on. We recognize they're all important topics, all questions and areas of focus that we know our families want to hear from, but we also recognize the limit of time. It doesn't mean we won't answer them or provide responses or answers to them. We'll provide the entire PowerPoint, and we will come back together. But within the limited time frame that we have this evening, we want to know what is most important for our time together this evening and the time that we have available. And the choice is up to our families that are here tonight, and we will respond accordingly. And we thought that would be the best use of our time this evening. How we thought we could do that is by using the chat feature and simply taking a priority vote of our community members, our families, not of our staff, of your top 2. So if we're only able to have deep conversations of the top 2 questions, we have 4 topics that we can address that have been brought up through our first 2 listening sessions and the community conversation where staff was not in attendance with the coalition. We think we could probably get through 2 thoroughly. And if we can address more, we will, but we're not sure that we will be able to in the time frame available. So if you
Melissa.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I was just going to read out the 4.
Yeah.
Oh, am I echoing horribly, or is it just on my end?
I can mute if that helps.
Okay, let's try. I was just going to read out the 4 that Melissa just mentioned that are on the screen right now for folks to prioritize who are here tonight. So, what action is KSD taking at the board, district, and school level to ensure BIPOC students feel safe and welcome the remainder of the school year based on what was shared in these listening sessions? Number 2, what action is KSD taking at the board, district, and school level to ensure BIPOC students feel, feel safe and welcome this school year and long-term based on what was shared in these listening sessions? So my apologies, the first one focusing on, the second one focusing on like long-term goals as well. Number 3, what answers can the board and district staff provide to specific questions from the community from previous sessions? And then the 4th one being, how will this partnership and these listening sessions continue moving forward? So those are just the 4. If any of them need to be read again, please do share. And if using the chat feature is not accessible, I would welcome an unmute to place your prioritization for these items. I'm going to pass it back to you, Melissa.
Yes. So if you could pick your top 2, either by unmuting or placing in the chat, we would prioritize based on a group prioritization and just get started. And I see the votes are starting to come in.
Yep, I see 3 and 2.
So that would be the answers direct and then long-term goals.
Any more thoughts for prioritizing the agenda for tonight? And again, unmute if you need to chime in.
2 and 3. So 2 and 3, 3 and 2. Okay.
So it's looking like, what action is KSD taking at the board, district, and school level to ensure BIPOC students feel safe and welcome next school year? Yeah, and
then one more for another vote for 2 and 4.
Okay.
So moving forward, yeah, also an important topic, keeping these going. So
yeah. So perhaps we could do 2 and 3 and
4
if
as we
time
have time.
permits 4, yes.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you. So I will, and I think we gave sufficient wait time and heard from everyone. I know we've also had some families are continuing to join us as they transition from the end of their day, so we'll probably continue to get people joining us throughout our time this evening. So we'll continue. Let me transition our slides. Thank you for participating in the prioritization. So we're going to dive right into talking about our work and responding to what this looks like and how this is going to work this evening. A bit different from how this has worked in the past is we are going to invite questions from our community, but we're going to begin by talking about a number of different areas, and I'll be working with colleagues from the districts. You'll be hearing a lot from different staff, KSD staff members. We're going to talk about specific areas of work that we are doing to ensure that our students of color, our BIPOC students, feel safe and welcome next school year and long term based on things that we've heard in our listening sessions. And so we're going to cover this. I want to be very clear, this is not an exhaustive list. There are a lot of things that we are working on, but these are a number of things that we wanted to highlight this evening for you. And we are prepared to speak to all of these different things. And we have several areas that we want to highlight this evening. So I'm going to ask Dr. Wade Behringer, our interim chief human resources officer. And I'm sorry, I know you just transitioned in from another meeting, Wade. But if you could get us going and talking a little bit about our leadership development work for both our KSD leaders and then race and equity professional learning for staff in general. And some of that work just highlighting what the plan is for 21-22 and kind of moving forward.
Absolutely. Thank you, Melissa, and thank you to all of our community members who are joining us this evening. Yes, we have a lot of plans to help support our KSD leadership development as well as our race and equity professional learning that supports all of our staff, specifically our KSD leadership team, but we'll be creating opportunities for all staff in KSD to have access to various pieces of our race and equity work. So as we think about this important work at the district level or leadership level, which covers our building principals as well as our central office administration, we have coaching and leading for racial equity that we're partnering with the Puget Sound ESD on, and that's in the winter and spring. That's currently happening right now, winter and spring of 2021. And we have courses offered for our classified, our certificated, our non-rep leaders, our building administrators, to go through a 6-session, 2-hour each course around coaching and leading for racial equity. This is something that we've brought to the district in previous years, and our various administrators have had access to. And because it was so critically important to our core values, we thought we'd bring this back and make sure that it was a key piece of our professional learning and offerings to our, not only our leaders, but in future to other support staff as well in the building and out of the building. And so we have several sessions that our leaders have access to. They can earn up to 24 clock hours in this work. Spread out from starting in March. We started in March of this year through the end of June, which gives them an opportunity to take the courses at their own speed. The Canvas class, through a Canvas class, which is supported again through the Puget Sound ESD. This summer, we're also bringing in, starting in August in 2021 and working through the end of the 22 school year, becoming an anti-racist educator trainer of trainers. So we're bringing in a series there. Our first session will begin in August and work through the entire school year, having several sessions throughout the year for those leaders who want to engage in becoming an anti-racist educator, trainer. And of course, once we've trained our trainers, then we'll be continuing to create opportunities within our central office as well as our school buildings and our labor groups to ensure that they have access to this same level of training throughout the 22-23 school year. And so next year is the building of the becoming an anti-racist educator, trainer of trainers, and then following year, creating opportunities to train our own employees throughout our labor groups. And again, hopefully creating opportunities for all of our staff, regardless of their position, to have access and opportunity to engage in this critically important work. These are also Canvas modules, but also creating space for dialogue and discussion around the topics that will be discussed within those trainings. That's something, again, that will take place all the way through next school year. And then we're also working with our, specifically our teachers, so KEA, our labor partner, and that we do a lot of bias training. They do a lot of bias training for staff, and they work with us in our professional development or program and professional development team to make sure that we're creating and opening doors for more and more teachers to have access to training around race, equity, and bias. So we're working through that as well. And so we're excited about the opportunities that we have. We're excited about the opportunities that we're going to bring to the district. We're starting obviously right now. I mean, not that we haven't done work like this, but this is much more intentional as we're moving through this spring and into the summer. And then having a very intentional emphasis on this work going into 21-22 school year. We've also just recently presented to the board a professional services contract partnership that we are going to be engaging with Bowman Global. And what Bowman Global does is provide race and equity training modules for all of our staff in the Kent School District. So we're looking to bring this into the 21-22 school year as well. And focusing specifically around racial literacy, stereotype threats, and cultural responsiveness. And so these trainings will be available to all of our bargaining groups in KSD. So all 9, soon to be 10 bargaining groups in KSD, and will be taught to our leaders, which then will be able to help assist with additional training for our staff at the building level. And so there'll be a certain level of training that all staff will be able to have access to, and then giving the building leaders tools and skills to be able to deliver even more intentional training at the building level as well. So again, very excited about the opportunities we have in front of us, excited for next year, working hard to resurface and really highlight the importance of race and equity work, and really trying to make sure that that is clear to our community and it's clear to our employees. Yeah.
Thanks, Wade. I'll pause briefly for any questions before we move on to our Student Family Services and Chief Ella, who will talk a little bit about our social emotional learning for staff and students. Not seeing anything in the chat. So please do feel free to use the chat for any questions, and we'll also come back at the end as you're listening and processing, if there's any questions that you have for any of our leaders. Chief Israel, oh yeah, you're done.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I was going to just take another pause for folks. That was a lot of info.
Yeah.
I apologize. I'm not really good at the chat because of my vision. But my question is, and I don't know if this is the right place, but I'm gonna ask it anyways. So with all this training that you guys are really getting ready to focus on for 21-22 and 22-23, I heard nothing in regards to how that will affect the children, and what steps you guys have made in order to rectify any issues in regards to the children while staff and while teachers, admin are all going through these trainings. So if this is not the place, I can table it, but I did want to ask that question.
No, I think there's no bad question at any setting. So I appreciate the question. Whether or not I can answer it completely, that would be another piece. But that's something definitely that I can come back and bring a response to you that's more well-rounded and inclusive of the response that you're looking for. This was specifically more around what we are doing at the district level, not only just leadership, but at the building level. But when it comes to, our hope on a high level is that training up all of our employees to become anti-racist educators and to become lead with race and equity at the forefront. We hope that will take place, obviously, in the classroom, on the school grounds, within the district, through our communication, through our interactions with students and families, because we are stepping into the space of trying to be even more intentional. I can't say what the results will be. I'm hoping that everyone will embrace this work with open arms and an open heart, and take it in and understand what this looks like and means in a practical application, working with students in classrooms. That's what I could say at this point. I do appreciate your question, and that's definitely something that we should be considering in any of the work that we do. How does it have an impact on our students? So I appreciate that.
Udonis, thank you for that question. Thank you, Dr. Behringer, for the clarification. I would be remiss if I did not remind each and every member of our team, and everyone here is a part of Team KSD. We appreciate that. The reality is our work has to focus on students. That's the reason why we exist. So our work is student focused. It is also adult centered. And we think about why do we say adult centered, student focused? Our focus has to be on the children we serve. We have 26,000 reasons why we exist in this organization. None of us as adults would be here without our students. And we want them to not just be present, but to be in an environment where they feel that they belong, that they feel that they can thrive, that they have a set of expectations and standards that are set before them by the adults who are learning and leading and teaching. And when we think about what that means, about expectations and standards, our continued work, and I know that we are talking about moving forward today, but I also want us to be mindful of the fact that there is a reason why a car has a large window in the front. That's the windshield. That helps us see down the road around the corner. But there's also something on that windshield typically that we don't often talk about, but it's very important. It's the rear view mirror. And there's a reason why it's smaller, but it is important that we have to take a look behind us to see exactly where we've been, to provide context, and to help us understand perhaps even greater meaning as to where we're going in the future. In our past, over the last 2.5 years, our district has embarked on a race and equity journey that has not been easy, and yet it is worth it. One of the areas that we have focused on, and I know that Melissa has shared some of these conversations with our members of OEO, and the reality is we became leaders who were action oriented. We created action learning projects, and long story short, the focus on racial equity was defined by the fact that when we do this work well, when we identify our students, address their individual needs, and ensure that students' needs come before adults, we will then be able to either ensure that we are not predicting student non-success or success based on race. And right now we can do that. We can identify. I can tell you that by and large, as an African-American male, if I were a student in Kent School District, I might have a close to a 2.5 times greater chance to be remanded to a disciplinary offense. Now that number is going down, but I can tell you that is a metric that we monitor. And to ensure that our students have what they need when they need it, we created a second action learning project. The first was to ensure that we have a safe, welcoming environment and a culture of care. And that's a process that we're moving forward. The second action learning project was that we increase opportunities for rigorous course offerings so that as students understand that expectations and standards are set for them to thrive academically, socially, emotionally, so that when they graduate, they're not just prepared, but they are ready to thrive in college, should they choose, in the career that they choose, and in the community in which they lead. And that is our continued focus. And third is to ensure that our students certainly not only have a rigorous course offering, but as I've mentioned before, that they also are not remanded to disciplinary offenses at disproportionate levels. Those 3 action plans are detailed, they are focused, but they are not easy, but they're made easier when we start with developing relationships with our students. Healthy, thoughtful, caring relationships that begin with the expectation. The expectation is that I love you, I believe in you, and I will not let you fail. That has to be our expectation. And the standard that we're setting is that finish line. Now we understand not every student is going to cross the finish line, whether it's grade level or performance level in a class, but the goal is that they should, and we should provide those supports to ensure that takes place. And I know we have fallen short in many areas, but our goal is that with this partnership, that we will continue to hold ourselves accountable and expect that our community will also do the same. From our coaching and leading for racial equity, I also want to make sure, as we've noted on our slide, that not just our staff are taking part in this work as leaders, not just our teachers, our paraeducators, our central admin, even our students as they lead each other in student leadership conversations, but also our board. Our board has been engaged in this work specifically over the last year. One previous board member who is no longer serving in that capacity, but a total of 4 of our board members were engaged in the coaching and leading for racial equity professional development opportunity that is sponsored by Puget Sound ESD, Education Service District. And there are 3 of our board directors who participated in that are with us today. I don't want to assume that they're ready to share at this point, but at some point, perhaps during this session, they would be certainly open to share their experiences as we all work together in support of our coaching and leading for racial equity work for our students, our staff, and our families.
Thank you, Dr. Watts. There's a question in the chat. It says here, are we looking at bringing in groups into the classroom/buildings and not just internal resources, specifically cultural groups and thought leaders who can speak from experience? And I believe this is in thinking about trainings.
Yes, and the answer is undeniably yes. To extend what Dr. Behringer mentioned, certainly that is our focus. We are a learning organization by definition, and we must enter even the most challenging topics for discussion. And I would argue that there's never been a greater time for or importance for racial equity to be at the front and the center of our learning focus. But it's also not, as many people may imagine, for some it may be a very uncomfortable conversation, and for others it may be less so. But our goal is to make sure that we create, again, going back to our action learning projects, a warm, welcoming environment so that people feel comfortable, that they feel comfortable in one sense, but also comfortable being uncomfortable, and that's okay. I can give you one prime example. Last spring, when we were engaged in what was taking place as a result of the killing of George Floyd. And we know that that moment will be etched in our memories for forever. At least I will speak for myself. I remember we had a meeting with our leadership team, and we were speaking about the work itself. And one of our leaders asked the question, is it okay for us to talk about Black Lives Matter? And the leader happened to be white. And it was an important question to ask, and one that brought a level of discomfort, and yet it was comfortable discomfort that we had to have, that discomfort that allowed us to move forward. Longer story short, the conversation really stemmed and moved in this direction that we must be able to say that certainly Black lives matter, or as we're had even more recent, Asian lives matter, the conversation that we're having due to the recent killings across the country. But we also said this, that they certainly don't matter more than white lives. That was the conversation, because that was the uncomfortable moment. But of course, they don't matter less. And that is the discussion that has to take place. And then considering the whys to those questions, and how do our students feel when they see others who look like them? And that goes into our recruitment conversations. So as you see, the complexities of this work is far-reaching. And we are having those conversations more so than we have, at least in my tenure, in the last 5 years. And I'm proud to say that we're becoming more comfortable with those uncomfortable conversations. We still have a great distance to travel, that's for sure. But I do want you to hear that, and certainly I welcome other leaders to share their experiences as well.
Thank you. And I'm not seeing any other questions, Melissa, in the chat.
I have my hand raised.
Oh, please.
Yeah, so sorry. So my question is, Dr. Watts, that you mentioned the over discipline of young Black males, right? And I'm going to assume that how you got that information is through your data that you collect.
Yes.
This is my question.
Sure.
I have this love-hate relationship, I'm going to be honest, with data, because of the fact that I know that we look at the numbers, but we don't connect like that quantitative stuff, that personal story to it, right? But I also want to say that it was hard for me when I was personally going out collecting parents' stories, or what school seems to have more data trends than others, and finding out that, it was almost 19 years since my son had attended that school that still has those issues. So I like that you're elevating the youth, but my whole thing is, what are we doing about the culture of that particular school, where that's the first line of defense for some of those teachers to discipline? And then even for me, like even outside of the discipline that you guys track, I end up finding out that my daughter at a totally different school is highly disciplined, because to me, anytime she's removed out, whether it's think time or whatever, right? To me, that's a form of discipline, right? Like she had to self-reflect. Of course, no, she didn't have to come home, but still, I don't know. To me, that's still problematic, right? Because teachers talk. Now she's looked at as, a potential problem. My thing is, where does the rubber meet the road, right? Like sometimes it's not just the children, it's misunderstandings. And where do we start teaching these teachers with, one, I don't know if you're pushing a bad policy, or if it's some kind of, well, let's be real, an implicit bias that you have on yourself against some of those students. Because I'm going to be real, like I don't want the impact on my daughter to be the same as it was on my son.
Yes. Ms. Rose, thank you for that. And I will say that I don't have all the answers to that. I can tell you that what you shared in terms of data, how we look at data, yes, sometimes it can be viewed as a number, but I also want you to know that we look at the faces of our students. And while I am not in every classroom every day, even in our in-person, I was in more classrooms than I am now, certainly. But the reality is we have to make sure that our students are our number one priority. And what I mean by that is, how are our students? Asking them, how are they being perceived? And students will tell you. If you ask a student, they will tell you the truth. And so I do want you to also know that part of our discipline is not necessarily what adults do to children. Discipline should be what we all do for ourselves. When we are disciplined, that means we are making the appropriate decisions given our circumstances. Now, we've all been children and we know that we're not perfect, but I do want you to know that there are strategies that we have put in place that have more to do with restoring relationships than it is to disciplining or damaging other human beings through disciplinary actions. And what I mean by that is we have our restorative practices. I don't believe that they are as widespread as they should be, but those restorative practices are in place in our schools and have been, and I can tell you for as long as I have been here, 5.5 years, and that it may have been longer. The reality is the goal, we know that restoring relationships is at the core of how we are going to move this school district forward, how we're going to move our relationships, how we're going to ensure that students trust adults and others so that they understand the reason why we're here is to learn, grow, achieve, and thrive. So I certainly wanted to elevate that, but also let you know we're not perfect. We are making perfect progress, and I appreciate I'll say this, I do appreciate your willingness to share, that we're not focused just on data, but on the students as human beings. And thank you for that.
I think I'd just like to add to that because, I appreciate what you're saying, Sharice, because you're right. And what people don't always realize is the data that we look at is only the data that leads to suspension.
Yeah. We're
not looking at the data leading up to it. So we don't have record of all of those steps that were taken and all of the discipline that happened even prior to that. But it really is about changing people's hearts, because that's really what this work is. It's what do you believe about Black and brown children, and how do you respond to Black and brown children? And as much as it is also, it's the teachers, but as well, but to realize that it's also the administrators. The teachers aren't the ones who hand out discipline. They don't suspend. And, and I hate to say it, kids don't call police on themselves. There's all sorts of levels to this. And so I appreciate the fact that we are focusing on the adult behavior, because I've said that since I got on this board. I mean, I would see these reports and it just frustrated me every single time. And my first question is, so how are we supporting our adults in order to better deal with the children? So I think that, as we move forward, the work with the adults is critical, but it will have to, it is about building relationships. And how do we ensure that everyone has care for each of our students? How do we make sure that everyone values each of our students? And when we find people that don't, how then do we change the impact? And because they're harming kids. That's the bottom line. They're harming our children. And so how do we then stop that harm? And sometimes it's hard decisions and hard conversations that have to happen. And a lot of times I'll say people don't want to do that. They don't want to have those hard conversations. Everyone wants to believe people are inherently good people. And yes, they've signed up to serve kids. And I'm not going to say that people aren't. I think most of our staff that are in front of our students really are doing their best, and they're trying to serve all of our students and doing what they can. However, again, it is a heart condition that we're talking about mostly. And so we have to figure out how we're going to make sure that everyone has the same level of care and concern and value for each of our students and our families. And so I think that is the work that we are engaging in. And you're right, it's taken a really long time. And so, you know, my oldest son is 32, so I've seen it for, you know, at least the 27 years that he was in school. So it's taken a really long time, but I'm happy with the direction. But I also am going to be interested to see how the accountability comes. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Director Daniels. I'm seeing one hand, and then I also want to be mindful of what communities have shared that they want to hear for tonight. So I want to make sure we get through that prioritization that we did a little bit earlier. I do see a hand raised for Leslie Hamada.
Thank you for seeing my little hand up there. Again, I'm Leslie Hamada. I'm one of your board directors. And you were talking about relating or what we're doing. And one of the things that I think is important is to develop relationships, not only with adults, but with kids. I have mentored in the community of schools here in Kent for 6 years and with kids of color. And that is a relationship where you build and learn about kids. And not only that, I've done it in 5 different districts and tutored kids of color for many, many, many years. And that doesn't say how wonderful I am. It's enriched my life to be around kids that have all different backgrounds, all different religions, all different races. And I've learned by hauling kids in my car to events with the nonprofit. I've learned about religion. I've learned about their cultures, what they eat for breakfast, and you develop a relationship with them. And one thing that I want to share you is that one of the most important things to me is young people's lives. And if I have a passion, one of my big passion is to try to make every child, and I mean that every child's life better, that I can touch or be around. In a system like being a director, you're touching policies and all that, but we can't lose sight of those young people that are in front of us. And I try to do that. I have been in, when I could, before COVID, I was inside the schools in 27 schools. I actually visited there. When we go back to in person, I hope to be in there. I hope to build more relationships, see how the culture is going in every school. And I've also, anybody that wants, including, I've had 2 young people take me up of it, and one got a whole group of kids together at one elementary, and we had a team meeting, and they talked about some of the things they're doing. So how can I assure you is kids are first with me. Relationships are probably very important to me, and that is with young people or adults. But I never lose sight of why I'm here, and I can assure you of that.
Thank you. And I'll go really quickly to William Hairston, I think is the hand raise that I saw. And then if we could continue on with sharing some information that was prioritized by communities. William?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. I will be very brief. I just kind of had a quick question about like district policy as far as what kind of policy or procedures are in place to kind of catch some of the judgment calls for exclusionary practices. And also Dr. Watson mentioned that there are restorative for relationship building practices too. And I was wondering if those are district policies. And he mentioned they weren't necessarily as widespread as he would like. And so what kind of is the expectation on, you know, buildings being on board with those policies, and if there's any process about this?
I know that Chief Ella and Mr. Heath also work very closely with our initiatives that support social emotional learning, and I would like to provide them an opportunity to share, provide input as well.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Watson. William, thank you for that question. We'll try to hit that in some of the sharing that we do here on the next few minutes, and then also take more questions. I'd like to start off by introducing myself. My name is Israel Vela. I'm the Chief of School Operations and Academic Support. With me this evening is Randy Heath, who is Executive Director of Student and Family Support Services. So we'll try to, first of all, share the pieces that we wanted to related to long-term supports. And I want to start out by providing a little bit of context, and that is as a leader of color who has been a teacher, a principal, district leadership, and now in my current role, I've had many experiences related to our topics that we're talking about tonight. I've grown from those experiences in terms of how they have impacted our students of color. And as Dr. Watts mentioned earlier, we have a ways to go yet, not only for our students, but we as adults and the adults that work with our students. And so I wanted to provide that context. In addition to that, I wanted to share one of the things that Student and Family Support Services has been doing over the last 5 years. And previous to that, working on tiered systems of support. What do those systems of support look like for academic support for all of our students, in particular our students of color? And districts all around the state, across the country, have also embarked upon, so what are the systems of supports? What do they look like as it relates to social emotional learning? How do you combine those when we think of a whole child and we think of it from a cultural perspective? And those are the pieces that Student and Family Support Services has been doing for some time now, and they continue to work at that. So today you will hear some of the supports that, and I know we're focusing on long-term, but there's some things that have been put in place this year from a remote perspective, and also from the listening sessions for the first 2 sessions about our students and about their concerns about returning back to school next year. Mr. Heath will talk about how that sense of belonging is so critical to systems of support. It's not enough to simply think about our academics without thinking about how our students and families feel from a welcoming perspective, as Dr. Watts mentioned earlier. And we are focusing on those pieces in student and family support. So I provide that context, and now I'm going to go ahead and turn over to Mr. Heath to talk a little bit more about specifics about what has been happening in those areas. In addition to that, he will share how we've worked with some of our community-based partners to help us moving forward. And he will also, William, I know you have that question. We'll kind of hit some of those pieces as well about how we're providing supports in those areas. So Randy, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to share tonight. I'm excited about the work that we do in Student and Family Support Services. I will say that when I first came to the district a number of years ago, what I found were pockets of excellence in terms of social emotional learning. There were schools that were absolutely on top of things, that were doing great things for their kids, were proactive and in front of things. But it was not systemic across the district. It was oftentimes dependent on certain personnel that were at the school or the leadership of the school. And so what we came to do was, how do we replicate what was happening at a few schools and make it systemic? And how do we do it in a way that will outlive any one person's place in the district? So when a principal moves on, will this continue? If the executive director of Student and Family Support Services moves on, will it continue? Have we built it so entrenched into our system that it doesn't go away? And that takes, unfortunately, no matter how quickly we want that to happen, that embedding in everything takes time, and it has taken much longer than obviously a lot of us have wanted. But we have supports in place right now that I feel are leading us where we need to be. We are by no means there yet, but we are working toward that. And it starts with really strong tier 1 supports, things that happen for everyone. And so, and part of that is a strong social emotional learning curriculum, things that happen in every single building. And that work is supported by a group of individuals at the district level that are our coaches around this. And so they come in and they work with individual buildings. And why the coaching model is important is that each school is a different has its own, unique both attributes and areas that they're trying to wrestle with a little bit. So the coaching model allows them to go in, work with the team, identify the issues that are specifically of most concern at a building, or the things that they are doing the best, and build upon, and then provide those supports to make things, even better. And so social emotional learning is one of those big ones. And an example of a tier 1 around social emotional learning is when we convened our back to school committee this last summer to try to understand what it was going to look like this school year. What we heard loud and clear, and this was a committee that was made up of teachers, administrators, district staff, community members, parents, this was a broad range of community voices that came. And the thing that we heard over and over again is we must have a strong social emotional learning component. Kids need to be supported. There needs to be relationships that are built. This will be especially important when we're starting in a remote environment, because Dr. Watts has mentioned that we have been working hard to try to get restorative practices embedded in all of our schools. But what sometimes people want to jump steps, and we've got to make sure that we don't jump steps, because when we jump steps in restorative practices, then it ends up maybe sometimes causing even more harm. And the first step is obviously there needs to be a relationship that is. So when you go to repair a relationship, if there was never a relationship there to start with, there's nothing to repair. So we've got to start and make sure that we're building those strong relationships from the very beginning. And then if something happens along the way, we can look to restore that. So one of the things that was the key piece that this committee came out with was we need, at least for the first month of the year, the school year here, every classroom in the district to start with like a morning meeting format and specific supports around what those morning meetings would look like, so that students and staff could get to start to learn to know each other and build those relationships, which we knew was going to be more difficult in a virtual spot than if they were in the actual classroom. And so what we learned about that, and the commitment was for a month that we would do this. What we found is a lot of our schools and a lot of our classrooms have continued this beyond this first month because they have found it to be such a valuable piece. And that's where a lot of this social emotional learning is happening. We are supporting at the district level activities that teachers can use within those classrooms, but they also have the flexibility to understand their kids. And if they're feeling strong with it, and feeling like they understand it, they can go off script as well. And so I think what this, for some teachers, there was a fear around teaching social emotional learning. It wasn't in their comfort zone, especially our secondary teachers. And so we wanted to give them a structure where they could start to understand that it's not as scary as we thought maybe it was, and that they can do it. And what our hope is that a lot of educators this year found that they could do this social emotional learning, that they were okay with this, that they, with proper structure and supports, they can do this. And we look to see this continue on. And we think this is a big key piece of the social emotional learning piece, because as we build those relationships, as we know more about our kids, then that helps us to understand why they might be frustrated, why they may be acting out at a certain time, or may they be doing these types of things. And conversely, as the students start to understand the adults, because a lot of this through the social emotional, these morning meetings and things, the adults are opening up about their lives as well and talking about their struggles at times. And it goes both ways. And so then we hope that we build some empathy on the kids sometimes when maybe a teacher says, I'm having a bad day, I'm struggling. They will understand and they will help as well. The other key component of really this cell that we try to teach to everyone is, first off, we need to have clear expectations. So much of what leads to a bigger issue later on was the lack of clear expectations. The other thing is conflict is a normal part of human interaction. So teaching everyone to understand, how do we work past conflict when we have conflict? Now, conflict is different from bullying. It's different from harassment, okay? That bullying and harassment are not a part of a natural human interaction. But conflict is, we're going to disagree on things. If we're going to, you know, anyone who's been a part of a family will understand that we've all had conflicts and we've all disagreed. And because we have a relationship and because we have strategies to work through our conflicts, then we're usually able to resolve them in a way that everyone feels good about. And so we're trying to teach these basic skills through some of this social emotional learning. And then as part of a multi-tiered system of support around this, we understand that we give something to all, and we build a structure to provide this thing that everyone's going to get. But we also understand that a certain group of students is going to need some additional stuff in addition to this. It also means that some of our staff are going to need additional supports that some of our other staff don't. And so that goes both ways. So like a coaching model from the district allows us to come and work with the staff as well when they are struggling, maybe around some things. And it's a support model, and it's designed in a way to help them feel good about things. And so, and then a really small group may need some really intensive supports. And I will tell you that our Tier 2 and Tier 3 is where we have continually tried to build more and more relationships with our community partners, because in many cases, our community partners are uniquely suited to help us connect with families. A lot of community agencies have spent a lot of time really building deep relationships with the families in our community. And so when they work hand in hand with us, they can come to us and say, you know, this is how this is being perceived at your school. And this is what we're hearing from our community members. And I know you maybe thought that it was coming off this way, but it's really coming off a different way. And we need to address this. And then it also comes to help, you know, they can have those conversations with the families as well. So we have really been working very hard to continue to build up our community partnerships. And we're continually looking for more. And we're continually bringing our community groups together on a regular basis. We have monthly meetings where they come to collaborate. And not only do they share with our staff, but they share with each other around what is working, what is not working. That has been especially important in this time of we're all trying to do business differently. And that's been a big part of this. Social emotional supports that we're looking at. And they are a lot of times able to go out and find mentors within the community that can help, you know, because mentorship has been shown to be one of the biggest things that can be proactive in a child's life, is when we can get them, you know, a steady adult figure that, you know, that can help provide that support. We could all use a mentor. I think a lot of us who as adults can look back throughout our lives on people who have been our both official and unofficial mentors and the difference they've made in our lives. And I know I have several. So I think that's a big piece there. And then I wanted just to mention, to address the question around the discipline piece and how do we kind of ensure and try to find biases. And there's some steps that were put into place this last year. It was put into place by the legislature around discipline changes around the discipline laws. And we were implementing it last year, and we're continuing to try to implement it this year, but we got a little derailed because discipline looked different when we went online. Okay, and we're getting ready to come back again. But we've added some important protections. One that I heard one of our parents speak about, which was, my kid is being sent out of class. They're not being suspended. They're being sent somewhere else to do something, and then they come back to class. Before, there didn't used to be a requirement that you informed parents that occurred, and that you didn't need to put it and log it into our system at any point. Okay, those are called classroom exclusions. They're not in the class. They're being sent out of the classroom. They're not being suspended. They're being sent somewhere else, but it's for a behavioral issue. The school is required to let the parent know now when something like that happens, how long they were out of class, and then you know, really track that for the student, and then really work toward a plan. So knowledge is power. A lot of times before, parents were not hearing that this was occurring. this now has put into place. The other thing that is, I think, a big thing along the way is whenever there's a suspension now that is being considered by the school, there's a whole process that they need to work through in order that includes bringing parents in before the decision to suspend happens. And so, what we've heard before is, well, if I had only been able to share beforehand some of these other things that are going on, I have some more pieces to the puzzle, I have some more information that or I just want to be able to question some things that my kids are telling me about what this is, and that might shed some light on, what's going on here. So we now have a process in place for that. And that's, I feel like it's a check on our system, because if we can get the parents involved earlier, then they can help advocate for their child in a better way. And so I think those changes, I think, are going to help us get where we need to go. So I've said a lot. So if there's questions, feel free.
Randy,
Thank you, Randy.
I'm sorry, Randy, could you talk a little bit about how some of the work we've done on disproportionality of discipline? We started that work, as you mentioned, moving into prior to the pandemic, because I know we had a question on that, and if you could share that and where we're going long term.
Yes, absolutely. So we honestly, this is, when I talk to my colleagues in other districts, we have a level of transparency with our data that, quite frankly, isn't the norm necessarily out there. Our board has, for a number of years, from the time that I have arrived in the district, has asked for regular reports around discipline. So that is a normal process that goes on. Beyond just the board reports, though, we have dashboards that we can track exclusionary rates. And there's a lot of work that goes behind the scenes. And so the people at the district office who are in charge of kind of supervising schools and others, they're looking at that data on a regular basis. They're having conversations with principals. When they see data that is out of line, then those are being addressed. But there's another piece to the discipline laws that have come into place that is also being enacted at this time, which is it requires every school, at every school level, in addition to the district level, at the school level, a team of individuals at the school must look at discipline data for their school beyond just the exclusionary, and that includes minor behavioral issues as well. Must look at that at a regular basis with the specific task of looking for disproportionality of the data in terms of race, in terms of languages spoken, in terms of special education, in terms of a number of different factors. And when they discover that disproportionality exists, then strategies need to be developed by the team to try to address that. And so that is some of the work that we've been doing. And we had started last year when our focus got taken elsewhere. And it's been tough to do that work this year because discipline in a remote environment looks so different from what it looks like when you have people when you have kids in class. And so we're anxious to continue that work. There's a template and a process that our MTSS coaches are ready to lead teams through to do that work and identify strategies and memorialize that in a location so we can see, what the strategies are. And then because the MTSS coaches will be working with the schools, then they'll also start to understand what is working in certain schools. And then maybe we'll have suggestions for other schools that might be trying to address a disproportionality issue. And so, we got last year, we were very fortunate that the state OSPI had a consultant that was working with us at 2 of our schools where we had identified that there were issues that maybe we wanted to dig into. The principals at both of those schools were very anxious to do that. And one of those schools was the school that was mentioned the most during these listening sessions, Neely O'Brien. And so I want you to understand that even before our listening sessions, we understood, and there was some identification that there were steps that needed to be taken, and there are steps within our system to identify these issues. And so Neely O'Brien and one of our other elementary schools, East Hill, voluntarily, the administrations there said, yes, we want this consulting, we want this help from OSBI, we want to help identify issues early and put in strategies into place. And so none of our administrators feel good about suspending kids. They, sometimes they fall to that because that is what, as a young administrator, that's what was taught to me when I was becoming in principal school. When I was getting my principal certificate and I was going through my university work, we were taught about how suspensions help change behaviors. When you start getting into the work, and there are other principals that are on this call that I see we start to see that suspending kids does not change behaviors. Suspending kids do not give us the results that we want. So we've learned a lot throughout the years. And
Thank you. I just wanted to chime in. There's a question in the chat, and I want to make sure that we get to it, asking about, are parents also being notified during the time that we're in right now with remote learning when there is an exclusion, like being kicked out of a Zoom room? Are those notifications happening? And then there is also, so after you answer that, there is a hand raised from Delia. And so Delia, I'll call on you next.
Okay, yes. So I will tell you that it has been given clear directions to the schools that when there is a need to remove a student from a Zoom classroom, that is their classroom. Sometimes we've had trouble with kids that have been invited in that aren't part of the classroom, and that would be just like any other classroom. If somebody walked out into, through the hall, they were sent away, and no, you can't be there. But if it was a student that legitimately was supposed to be there and there was behavioral reasons why they were removed from the room, that is a classroom exclusion, and parent is supposed to be notified. And if that does, if you know of a situation where that has not happened, then I would love to find out more about it so we can try to figure out why that happened.
Thank you. And then Delia, you had your hand raised.
Yes, I have a twofold. One would be when the discipline changed and the children were sent out of class, was that put onto their record? That's the first question. And then two, in regards to disciplinary, especially during remote, when children were using derogatory name calling and cussing at children and basically starting chat fights, and there was no disciplinary given, then how is that dealt with?
Okay. Two-part question. So one of the things that we've worked hard in the last few years is we understand that students' records follow them, their discipline records. And we would get into a spot sometimes where we would look at a student's discipline record from junior high or high school level, and you'd see like 120 referrals that are discipline entries that are in there. And then you start looking back a little closer at it, and you see that 100 of them happened in elementary school for maybe minor things that were happening in second or third grade, and that really never should have been in a discipline record to start with in terms of that. And so we've taken steps to try to make sure that the permanent discipline record only includes the major incidents that we are talking about, such as like suspensions and those types of things at the elementary and the middle school level. We are still tracking those behaviors, but more as what supports do we need to put in? One of the things that we like to do is really look at when you see a number of like minor type behaviors, and you see multiple kids doing that same those same minor behaviors, you have to ask as a system, is there something wrong with our system that is not supporting kids right in order to be able to do the expectations? For example, if you are seeing multiple minor infractions from multiple kids at first recess for aggressive behavior, that's a trigger, not that the student needs to be disciplined more. That's a trigger to understand, why are we having so many issues at first lunch that we don't have, or first recess that we don't have at second recess? What is different between the two? Is there different people supervising, and that may be causing some of the issues? Is it that we were really explicit and taught expectations to second recess, but we forgot to do that to first recess, and we need to go back and need to reteach those? So we need to track those minor behaviors so that we understand what are problems with our system. And that's a big focus, because a change in focus, I will say, in recent years, like the last 2 to 3 years, that's been a huge change in focus, because it used to be around tracking students and what happens with students, when really looking at, is there something wrong with our system that is allowing for this to happen? So that's one. The other piece I want to address is our current environment this year. I don't want to say there's no discipline, because there is discipline going on. We've had to become creative around what that discipline looks like, because what we've done in the past doesn't work in an online environment. And so what we have stressed with the schools is, students are in their homes. Okay, so we have to be working with parents around whenever there is a disciplinary action that's going on. So if we have a situation where in the chat we have inappropriate language that's going back and forth between kids in the chat, then we need to involve the parents on both sides of all the students that are there. First off, let them know what's going on. Next, say, here's the tool. This is how you can figure out what your kids are saying in the chat. Because for some, the kids' technology skills are a whole lot better than their technology skills. So we need to be able to give parents the tools that they need to be able to help get in there, see what their kids have been up to, and help us to solve those problems that may be arising. And my hope, once again, I hope that this is one of those things, those good things that come out of this environment. Because honestly, we always should be trying to involve parents at the earliest signs that there might be. Kids make mistakes. Kids learn by making mistakes. And so we don't need to hammer them. We need to understand why they're making the mistakes that they're making. Make it clear, both from a school and from a family level, what our expectations are. And then give them the freedom back again to try, now that they have these new skills and these new tools. And then if they make the mistake again, then we come back together as a group again. So, what we haven't been able to do is necessarily suspend kids, and we haven't been able to give them after school detention or lunch detention. We've had to become creative. But whenever a school is given information that there may be like harassment or bullying or other inappropriate things that are going on in chat or in classrooms, the adults in the building address it. And it's been clear to them that we expect them to address it. They can't just say, oh, well. So once again, if that's not occurring, first step is to report that to the building principal. And then if not there, then continuing to go up the command.
William, I see your hand raised. Might have been from before, but I want to check. William?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, sorry about that. The technical difficulties of Zoom Live. I just wanted to definitely say appreciate all your guys' hard work, especially with the MTSS stuff. One of the things that you had mentioned was communicating with CBOs and community-based organizations. Is there anywhere where there's a list or a way to identify what community-based organizations are accessible to specific schools, or how that works throughout the district? And then secondly, also too, as we talk about the MTSS coaching and what does that coaching and policy look like, you know what I mean, throughout the district? And then how will we be able to identify like what are our tier 1 or tier 2 supports for our specific students? Is there going to be like a place where we could go and kind of look for that? Because obviously you had mentioned that, you know, every school is different, so they would all kind of have different needs. So.
Yeah, right, exactly. You know, we regularly maintain a large number of community-based organizations that we have MOUs with, you know, and so that's one way we can identify. But we're always finding new ones all the time. And one of the first steps we always, whenever I get approached from a new like CBO that we haven't heard from or not, then we always invite them to the monthly meeting to kind of start the ball rolling and seeing, you know, and introducing them to us. But, you know, we work and put MOUs into place when MOUs are needed. And, you know, some we are in partnership through grants that we've received. Some receive grants from outside, and then they come to us and say, can we do the work in your schools? And, you know, we tend not to turn anyone away unless their scope of work is like really not in line with what we were doing. If they came, somebody community-based came and they had this scope of work that just did not fit into anything that we were doing, then we probably might say, not really. But, you know, many of our CBOs are in multiple of our schools. Some are in just 1 or 2. So it kind of depends. Sometimes the schools go out and find the community partners themselves and then come to us to help get an MOU put into place. So it really comes from a variety of different ways that we find.
Randy, can you share William's last part of the question was, how could a school leverage the support of an MTSS coach?
Yeah, so every school is assigned a specific an MTSS coach who checks in regularly with the administration and attends the meetings that they are having. So there's specific ones that are assigned. And I will tell you that another collaboration that we've started doing is there are a number of like coaching type roles in our inclusive education department as well that go out and support schools. And we've started having regular collaboration meetings with our MTSS coaches and our IE coaches, so that we're all like in line and that we're being consistent as well in the supports that we're given.
And Randy, would you, oh, go ahead. We're going to finish off your answer.
Oh, yeah. I think as we do this work more and more, we learn more and more about what works. For example, this is the year that last year we started like quarterly community-based organization meetings. This year we moved to monthly because what we were hearing was both the district and the CBOs were finding the monthly meetings beneficial. And so we are always looking to adapt to find out what works best for everyone.
Thank you for that. And would you say, Randy, the best way to figure out like what multi-tier student supports are in the specific school that a person is attending? To William's question, would the best place to get that information be like, say, a building administrator, like say the principal or assistant principal?
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. And then we just had a suggestion, a really, really good one, to slow down on the use of acronyms. So if we could say them out. And then Maya, you have your hand raised.
Thank you. I sort of want to loop back to our students. I feel like one of the reasons I asked the question about the community groups is that back when we had 9/11 and I had come into the school district to bring with the South Asian public education group, we came to really talk about anti-bias training and begin with the top level, our executive cabinet, and then work our way down to counselors, to our teachers, to our business professionals, to our transportation. All of those folks touch our students in one way or another. And I guess I'm sort of in the minority in thinking about trainings, because I'm so aware of so many individuals who go through this training and yet don't have the ability to treat other individuals with respect. And you wonder about how they would treat our students with respect. And so I always wonder about what will be impactful to our educators. And one of the things that I felt very strongly about was going into the classrooms or wherever it might be with our counselors, with our transportation. Hearing from our students was always the most impactful way of reaching to the heart. We talk about heart, we talk about students. When I hear, about trainings and MTSS and all of that is great. I think our district is very caring in how we deliver the provision, the delivery of all of these resources. But I still feel like the thing that's missing here are hearing from our students. And I know we're working on it, and we have a race and equity policy, but even looking at that race and equity policy, I don't feel like that student voice is there, and what are the opportunities they have to be part of these delivery methods, of training to our educators. It's so much more impactful when they speak from the heart and they provide the ideas. And so I see people nodding, and I know I'm not saying something that no one else knows, but I just feel like very strongly that period of time where we were providing anti-bias training, the most impactful times were when our students spoke. And they are more willing to go to a community group than they are to our educators sometimes, because they feel comfortable and free to speak. So that was the reason I originated that question about community groups coming from the outside. So thank you. Just wanted to say that.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate those words. It definitely does speak to the importance of having folks with most lived experience, folks who are, from the gate grounded in that collectivist work to come in and help with that training. So I appreciate that. Thank you. I think I saw, let's see, Joe Bento.
Hi there. Joe Benno, I'm a board director. I wrote down a couple things kind of to ground us back to our question about like the next school year and then long term based on these listening sessions. And I want to kind of go back to what Director Vengadhasalam said about student voice. I think about at my school when there was a year we did monthly student circles where we did almost like concentric circles where the staff had to sit on the outside and all they did was listen, and the students were on the inside and all they did was speak. And we had different groups of students. One group was talking about Black Lives Matter. One group was students who are immigrants. One group was LGBTQ. And there was a bunch of different groups that spoke. And what was great was like the students kind of led these circles. There was a kind of like moderator, but the moderator was like, I don't even know why I'm here. The students are doing everything, but it was great to have a moderator kind of lead the students who may not know exactly next steps. And I thought that was really powerful as far as like, it doesn't have to be consultants. It doesn't have to be community-based organizations. They're all helpful. They're all great, but I think the students know what's going on in the buildings. Like they know. I talk to my kiddos and they tell me things that like I thought only I knew as an adult. Like in my psych class, we were talking about the school to prison pipeline the other day. They were talking about discipline when we're in person. And it's like, they're not dumb. They know what's happening and they can voice it. And so when they talk about things like discipline, and I mentioned things like, well, discipline's kind of determined by this matrix from OSPI, and the school district has to implement it, and the schools do the implementation, and the admin decide how they kind of instruct or discipline or suspend or exclude or whatever. And it's just interesting how like in the system that we're in, as we try to make changes, there's other systems in the way. And so being a giant system, that sometimes like the system gets in the way of itself. And the students say that all the time. And so by hearing the students say that, I think, and hearing students, whether it's elementary, middle, or high school, having groups of students lead those discussions, I think is really important as we move forward. It's great to hear the perspectives of admin and educator. As a teacher, to me, it's important to hear educator voice. But like at some point, the students know what's happening and we need to listen to them and we need to hear their experiences, because we can have all this data, but not all the data gets recorded. And we know it doesn't. It's like, oh, we're not going to call that bullying. We're going to call that exclusion, or we're going to, like, we call it something so it doesn't look bad. And we know that happens. And I'm not calling people out. We know it happens because things get overwhelmed. We don't want things to look bad. And it's just one of the things that happens. So I just always want to center students, and I want to not center the system. I don't want to center discipline matrices. I don't want to center any of that stuff that is school to prison pipeline. I want to center the students or the voices that matter, because that's what's important. And so as I hear all this, I think it's great. I think it's a great start. I think it's a great implementation. I think things like coaching models are okay. I think sometimes for things like, curriculum, things like that, or specific things that programs that individual schools want to do, coaching models are awesome. I think for things like racism, I think that there doesn't need to be a coaching model. I think that there needs to be a stance, and that the district needs to provide trainings for the schools so that the schools can do the trainings for the staff and students so that they can implement that. Like I don't think a coaching model works for things like racism and racial, social, and economic justice. So those are kind of my thoughts as we move on to the future. I think what we're doing now is amazing. I think we need to do better. And I also think we need to get students involved, and it doesn't need to be huge. I think the student groups that are on campus now can lead those in their leadership, and they want to lead. And I think we need to let them. So that's my 2 cents right there. So thank you for letting me have a voice.
Thank you, Director Benno. I appreciate your input. And I think, Jordanos, did you want me to transition us? We're at about just over 20 minutes left. And I see Director Venkatachalam, did you have another comment, or was your hand still up from before? Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
I don't see additional hands or anything in the chat. And I'm also keeping an eye on time and wanting to get to some of the rest of the questions that were asked from past sessions.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen. I'm gonna share my screen again. And what I appreciate about the conversation, the ongoing conversation, including a lot of what has been shared in the comments and the back and forth, is a lot of what we were prepared to address and respond to as district staff were questions that were asked from our community members in previous sessions, are things that have come up already naturally in our conversations about how we're going to move forward. What does accountability look like? So we've talked about a few of these items already when we talk about accountability. And the question came in a few different ways, both from the first session, the second session, and the community session. But really, we heard loud and clear, what is our plan to ensure that the listening sessions that we've held are impacting our students at KSD? And how are we moving forward? And so we wanted to highlight just a few of the things, and some of the things that you're seeing on the screen, like the professional learning, prioritizing our work around creating welcoming environments, social emotional learning supports for students and staff, board race and equity training. We've talked about some of those. Continuing community listening sessions. We've talked a little bit about that. We want to make sure that we get to that as well, because that was a priority we identified in the beginning for our time together. But implementing student and staff listening sessions, that's something we touched base on in session 2. And And student voice is absolutely a priority for us in Kent School District. It's also a part of our specific work with the Kingmakers of Oakland. And we are going to be going on a listening tour specifically with around creating welcoming environments and culture climate listening session for our African American male and female students in secondary schools. And that listening tour is specific to our work with Kingmakers, which the board approved in January. And that work has been developing and ongoing in partnership with our Equity Council. So there were some questions related to the Kingmakers work and targeted universalism from our community as well. So I want to talk about that. I think we can probably come back to some of these other things, like talk and steering committee is coming up in the next slide about how families can engage specifically to impact change, because I want to honor our time and make sure we get through some of the more detailed questions that were asked about from our community. But again, we will provide all of the information, these slides, and of course be available for further conversations. A big part of this work and our communication has been, and this partnership in our communication has been around board policy. And there was a couple specific questions asked about what policies are up for review for the remainder of this year. And I want to thank my colleague, Dr. Jewel Harmon, who really has done a lot of work over the past few years specifically to support our board with the policy review process. And this information that you're seeing on your screen, or that we will share with you if you're not able to view it, is talk specifically about the process for policy review that our board goes through. There are, each policy requires a minimum of 2 readings the board considers before it goes for approval at a regular board meeting. So it is a quite, it might seem like quite an extensive process, but the board has developed a good cadence. And they're addressing a number of different policies and series that they're going through, and they've divided that work amongst themselves. We've included links to information so these numbers will make sense and mean more to you than just as numbers on the screen. But we've listed out the dates of the actual board meetings and where you can get information about which policies have been reviewed this year and updated, and the final scheduled, already scheduled, there still are additional board meetings, but policy board review meeting specifically is actually tomorrow evening, March 31st. Dr. Harmon, did you want to add anything about this slide, or did I cover it?
I think it's good. I think the most important piece, and we don't have to go to the slide since we're short on the next slide since we're short on time, is just talking to them about the general process of like how, a little bit more about how policies come to be and where does the district get the information to update a process. Hold on just 1 second, please.
Okay.
So the process is, and so our policies do reflect district priorities and belief systems, but the general language from our policies comes from the Washington State School Directors Association, and they support several districts across the state of Washington in providing their policy work. They also provide some of the legal updates to make sure that they're aligned with Washington codes and laws. And so we use that as our, I guess, our foundation and our anchor. And then we go through the process of adding our district belief systems, as long as that does not conflict with law. And WASDA also helps us with keeping that cadence of what's updated as laws change. So a lot of times what we see as an update of what policies get selected for update are a balance of what is critical and what's happening in our district at the time and what our board has prioritized, as well as what WASDA is suggesting as an essential update based on a legal change or possibly or legal cases or actions in other districts. And so we follow that to help us prioritize and rank what we are updating each time we have a session. And it's a constant process, so we will forever be updating our policies because every time we have a session, the world is also moving. So policies become out of date, laws change, and belief systems shift, or we take an evaluation of how our actions in the policies are operationalized and what that impact looks like. And sometimes that brings us back to the table to shift what policy looks like. So I just wanted to make sure that they understood like kind of how it comes to be, and it's not a random thought process of just words on a piece of paper. The other piece of this is that, so as a public entity, you have an opportunity to engage in this policy work with our board, because in addition to the work sessions that happen, and we don't have public comment during the work session, but the second reading is done at a regular board meeting, and that is a space where public comment is welcome, and the community is invited to provide comment on any topic on the board agenda, but specifically they could speak to a policy before the board takes an action on that policy as well. So there's an opportunity to engage there. There's also an opportunity to reach out to our board if you have questions about policy or suggestions, or that is possible as well. So I just wanted to provide that little piece of kind of not just where we've been and how it comes to be, but also how the community could engage in that policy work.
Thank you, Dr. Harmon. So we do have regular board meetings twice a month. They're 7 p.m. and they are live streamed, and we are working to return to in-person meetings as well, as that's now an opportunity with the changes that have happened from moving into phase 3 in King County. So we'll be providing information when that does happen and what that will look like and what the requirements are. Another opportunity for our BIPOC families and all families to have a greater impact on policy change is this November. Director Districts 4 and 5 will be up for election. And those are school board directors are elected to 4-year terms, and those seats are voted on by Kent School District voters. So we will provide information about deadlines, and those will be, I think it's May that those open up, and we'll provide information to all of our families very soon through our regular KSD platforms.
Thank you for the update as well. Just as Vice President Bettinger did mention in chat, it's important to note that not only District 4 and 5 seats will be up for election, but also District 1, where
yes,
Director Benno represents, and that's important for everyone to know.
Yes, and yes, thank you, President Daniels. She's happy to connect with anyone interested in learning more. So we will provide information about that as well, but I appreciate that. As always, I know we're short on time, but I want to make sure if there's any questions about this board policy information piece before we move on to other information. If there's any questions. President Daniels, perhaps you could put your email in the chat.
I was actually just doing that along with my phone number. So
okay, thank you.
Yeah. And if there's anyone you know, even if any one of you aren't interested, If there's someone you know, I'd be happy, and I'm sure others would as well, be happy to answer questions and, share experience. Yeah, anytime. So I'll put my phone number and my email in the chat.
Is that your personal direct cell phone, Denise?
I am putting my personal direct cell phone. Yeah.
I've been trying to get that for a minute, so I'm
You've
hold
had
on
it.
to
You've
I know,
had
I'm
it.
just messing with you.
Okay.
Okay. So if there's no other, and thank you, Director Vengadaslam is also available. We'll make sure that the technical information as far as the deadlines, information from King County elections, the requirements for running for an elected official office, and the maps for these district director positions are all available on our website. And other numbers to call for support at the district office as well. And all of our board director contact information is also available on our website. And I see your hand, Delia. You have a question?
So yes, through this whole meeting, I've heard that you guys are going to send information out, and that's been a continued statement. Is that going to be sent out through you guys as the district, or is that going to be sent through South King County Discipline Coalition? I'm just trying to understand that information because I want to make sure what to look for.
Correct.
Or where to
yes.
go and all that jazz.
Thank you. Yes, I will send the PowerPoint as a PDF to Charisse and Mahogany so that they can send it to you as well as other to all community members, family members who are attending so that they can send it directly to you who registered through the South King County Coalition website. We might add additional, we've been taking notes just on additional questions and information that's been requested through the conversation this evening, so we can add that as well. We generally have a debrief, but and I'll take a copy of the chat notes as well and make sure that that is sent as a document to file too. So it'll come from the coalition. Okay. So one of the questions, Abril, I see your hand up.
So you guys, I just wanted to say that I appreciate the conversation again. I had to stay, not as I've been listening, but I couldn't respond as much as I wanted to because I'm living real life with the kids right now. So I just wanted to say that I appreciate this conversation and the steps that we've been making in action to try to set up a framework that is more geared towards our children succeeding. And I wanted to also say that it's been very therapeutic for our children to be able to share their stories in a way that they know that it's being looked at and heard for change, not for for you to get in trouble. So I just appreciate, all the hands that are in this so that our children can have the foundation they need. And I just wanted to say thank you for the steps we're all taking.
I want to piggyback off of you, bro, because the one thing that I've learned through the pandemic is I finally understood what my daughter meant by when she said she felt invisible. And I also have to take my accountability on the mama bear coming out and thinking I was supporting her when all she said is later on, through this pandemic, all she wanted to do was just be heard and seen. So, which is crazy. She's in the background listening because even at 11 years old, she wants to see how standing up impacts long-lasting true change. So I don't know. I know that we're thinking about secondary, right? Like supporting those kids at 7th grade and beyond. But I guess I liked everything that you guys have said, but I would like to push a little bit that, with some of these kids, by the time they get to that age, especially the ones that you really want to reach, you've missed the mark. So I guess I'm wondering, not trying to change everything that we said, but like moving forward, where are the opportunities for those that are in 5th and 6th grade, since, you know, our 6th grade is still in elementary, right? Like they haven't transitioned or made that cusp or that change yet over. But mentally, you know, some of those kids are ready to speak up in a more meaningful way. So thank you. And just wanted to put that little caveat in there.
Thank you, Charisse and Debra. And Delia, is your hand back up? Okay. So I am recognizing the time. We have probably a dozen more slides to get through and a number of questions. And I think it would be, it would not be authentic to rush through them. And I don't want to just go through and force trying to get through and rush through just because I'm trying to beat the clock. So we've done the work, we can answer the questions, we know we're coming back together. I'd like to talk a little bit in our last few minutes together more about what does this look like moving forward and coming back together for future listening sessions. And I'd like to lean on my colleagues, my partners, Charisse and Jordanos, to kind of help close out the conversation and turn to that part of, turn to that topic, if that's okay, for moving there.
Yes, thank you, Melissa. And Charisse also chime in, but as has been mentioned both tonight and in meetings past, this is ongoing work. And we're already talking about frequency of when we come back together, because, you know, we can have all the great ideas in the world, but if there isn't kind of like a checks and balances thing, then we're just talking about fantastic ideas, right? Without having those checks for accountability. So please do know we are still continuing to build the work, continuing to take a look at, you know, the frequency of when we come together so that everyone is included in building this work out. Charisse, I want to open up to you if there just are some additional words that you would like to share.
I guess the only thing I would like to share is thank you on part of the school district and also on community for trusting our vision, right? Like we didn't know exactly where this was going to go, but we heard you. We tried other avenues that just didn't seem like they were culturally responsive to us in order to push the needs. So yeah, thanks on both sides for allowing us to tear down those walls to make some bridges, right? And I can't wait to see what grows from this.
So please do be on the lookout for the information, for the slides, and also be on the lookout too for when we come back together to continue this work.
Wonderful. Well, we will get that information to you, and we, on behalf of the district, I also want to say thank you again to our partners, to our families. And with that, I will turn it back over to President Daniels to adjourn our meeting.
Absolutely. Thank you all again. It's always wonderful to get together and to hear you. So with this at 6:59, our meeting is adjourned. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.